the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today I am beaming from the same time zone. My friend and colleague Matt Trease is here and located in Seattle. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, thanks, Jen. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I'll be seeing you next week, actually, for your work with Margin Shift, and I met you through the vehicle of poetry. Back in pre-pandemic times, there was an open mic called the Emerald Quarry, and we got into each other's orbit through that. Mm-hmm. And you were working with astrology to write poems, which I found super amazing. So wondering if you'd be willing to kick us off by reading one of them.
Sure. I'm going to read from a manuscript I'm working on right now that I started in 2019. I just finished reading Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas, and I was really interested in mapping in poems the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And so I took his kind of laundry list of source material from those chapters on the Saturn-Pluto cycle, and I compiled a long list of sources, and then I kind of whittled those down. And then I tried to hit like all the major alignments from particularly the 20th century, but I went way back to Dante and whatnot. Dante actually provided a structure for the poem. So all the parts of the poem, it's one long poem, but they're like 33 parts, and each one maps to one of the cantos in the Inferno. So I'll go ahead and read. These are bibliomantically composed. So I set the sources down in a pile, and then I opened each source up and pulled a line out from each. And then I kind of let those jam together a little bit. And then I did some editing in the background. But I'll read from that. The whole thing is called American Inanity, after the goddess Inanna. And it's a divined cento, which is a poem made up of quotes in 33 cantos. So I'm going to read the first two parts. 1. Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk. I have not been told how long we will be here, sniffing for a scapegoat to end things many ancient peoples have seen. A blade cutting the earth, a patient transformed, an engine. The lights are on all the time. The empire had grown too unwieldy to be ruled, a body devoid of all gravity fending off the Satans forbidding, why do you do that to us? They couldn't catch those things they were. Furious measures of repressed retribution. Most men feel inadequate when confronted. Talk about an absent God, struggling with terror, turn to view visible people who lived under the seas. A monstrous child erupts all over. 2. You may ask yourself, my God, what have I done? The gods are all angry. People have trouble even communicating. There are babies cooped in padded pen lots, their childhood bombed out of their houses, ready to risk danger, undertaking this wall, this well-set trap. Permit me to rip open a piece of the iron curtain that hides a whole labyrinth of the dead common heritage of children I am no longer able to adjust, to reach the consequences great feelings take with them. Come here, they said. Why did you do that to us? Swept up in the current, gone, vanished, entire nations acting out their aroused energies rising within that want to control Anaximander's map like a serpent with its tail in its mouth. I fear it will in folly end the front door in a perpetual state of disrepair, reel in shadows of those indignant desert birds.
Thank you. Saturn-Pluto. Did you find in March of 2020, when they were conjoined in Capricorn, there was an intensification of work on the manuscript?
That part had been done. Since that followed the Inferno, I just kind of naturally went along and started pulling together text from different quarantines. So Saturn and Pluto were still a part of what I was doing, but the main criteria then shifted. And so the Purgatorio kind of follows text from quarantines. And that one, I'm still kind of hammering down and editing a little bit. This one here is just about, I'm just working on the last essay, the introductory essay, to go start sending it out to places.
Very cool. Very cool. So what was the first book of astrology that you remember reading?
Well, I had been only like loosely interested in astrology. And then I was dating someone who was really into astrology and pointed me to this book by Ellias Lonsdale, which is a book of Chandra symbols that are based on the different degrees of the zodiac, called Inside Degrees. And it really struck me like how poetic a lot of the imagery was. And so it kind of got me hooked and really sent me down a rabbit hole, starting to learn more about astrology, more than just the sun sign stuff that I had kind of been familiar with before that point.
Right. So what is a Chandra symbol?
So probably the best way to put it is that Lonsdale was channeling, I believe, his deceased wife, and coming up with symbolic images for each degree of the zodiac. And it's very similar to what's going on in Dane Rudhyar's Astrological Mandala. So, you know, you're looking at kind of divinated images associated with the cycle that happens as you go around the wheel.
Have you tried to divine your own symbols for the degrees?
I have not gotten to that yet.
Okay.
I do a lot of like divination stuff. I'm working on a tarot deck that's all like found images that I get from going around my own neighborhoods and whatnot. And it's a slow process.
Sure. You can't rush the flaneur, right?
Yeah, I did do a whole sequence of poems that tried to take, where I took the planets each day during the month of August, and I mapped them according to Lonsdale's symbols and then kind of mashed them together into poems.
Did you find when you were working with those images on those days that it resonated with what was happening in that day for you?
I don't know if I found that it was resonating with what was happening that day, but it did kind of, I did start to see a larger movement of the images that seemed to say something about that midsummer period, kind of mid-Leo to mid-Virgo. So
very cool. So do you still reference this work in your current astrology?
You know, I will use Rudhyar's Astrological Mandala when I feel kind of stumped, you know, when, you know, I feel like there's something going on in what a client is asking about, and I'm not necessarily finding it with the back and forth with the client. And so I'll go look up the image and then do a dive that way, see if that resonates. And often it does, and in ways that I wouldn't have been able to predict just from the standard delineations.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So if you were to be stranded on a desert island and you could take an ephemeris and 3 other books with you, what would be your picks?
Okay. Well, for starters, I would pick Dorotheus's Carmen Astrologicum. I was drawn to it because it at least originally was a poem, but also like there's so much richness in here about not just taking a standard delineation, but always having a set of mitigating factors that can temper readings so that you're not always giving some kind of bombastic, dire claim to a client, but can really dig in deep there's also just a lot of mystery in there about the elements and, how they relate to like what it is that we're doing. And it's just really interesting. And I would say that Ben Dykes' more recent translation of Firmicus kind of holds that up as well. I mean, that's a text that has been known to have these very outlandish delineations. But then you start to see that in later parts of that text, that there's an emphasis on that, apotalismatics, so that, you're having lots of different kind of ground rules for readjusting what you're looking at and making sure that you're mitigating everything and tempering what you're reading.
Do you find poetic inspiration in Dorotheus as well for your own work as a poet?
I find a lot of resonance.
Mm-hmm.
As far as inspiration, I haven't used it as like source material yet, though every book I have winds up at some point being some kind of source material.
Very cool. Okay, so that's book number 1, Dorotheus is Carmen Astrologicum, as translated by Ben Dykes. What would be your second pick?
Abu Mashar's on the solar revolutions.
So you're holding up the light green one translated from Arabic by Ben, and this is the one that he did earlier, translated from the Latin. So
yeah, I've got that one.
Okay.
As well. But this is the one I've been digging more into. There's just so much about the kind of symbolic repetitions of time that I feel like if I'm stuck on a desert island, I want books that keep on giving.
Okay.
And so
you got to get your solar returns in there, right? What about this year on the island? And now this year. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is there an escape plan for this year? likely. Oh no, it's a 12th house year. What are we going to do?
Well, it's just like in the show Lost, eventually you'll find out that your desert island is some kind of spiritual dimension that, that may or may not be purgatory.
Right. Yeah. All right. So you said you've been pouring through the Arabic one, and it seems like the answer might be obvious. Well, it was closer to the source. But in your experience of reading both Ben's translation from the Latin and translation from the Arabic, how would you describe the quality of difference as a consumer of this version of Abu Mashar's work?
Well, the Arabic translation strikes me as having a kind of more of a richness to it. Mm-hmm. It's hard to really pin down. But I do feel like that there is a bit more nuance to it. And that probably has to do with it being the original and not being just kind of redacted, most likely, when it went into the Latin.
Yeah, I'm glad that Ben was able to go back to the Arabic to do that for us as a service to the community.
Yeah, and all of his translations are, that's a big gift to all of us to have a lot of these things in translation. Because I remember when I first got into astrology, I was, we're just starting to get a lot of things showing up that were quality translations. So it's really nice to see that we now have a vast library's worth of this stuff to be able to dig into for quite a while.
Yeah. May it continue. There's still so many Persian sources from the Arabic era of astrology that are waiting to be discovered because we have sort of the top of the pops, but there's a lot of extra texts that are floating around just begging pick me to add to what we know. Yeah. Okay. So we have then Abu Mashar's on solar revolutions as number 2. What would be your third?
Well, I have to have some kind of divinated work. So I would go with the Astrological Mandala, and mostly because it's really hard to find copies of this anymore. So if I had to leave to go to a desert island, I want to preserve something that might not be here when I get back.
Look at this monster version. I'm holding up a library edition that's enormous. I don't know how this happened, but it looks like there were obviously multiple printings at the same time. Yeah, fully hardbound. Oh, and then the back cover shows a lovely portrait of the man. So yeah, thought I'd show that one to you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I did not know they did a large format version.
Yeah.
I mean, I just have the Viking portable kind of thing.
Which is probably falling apart at this point, right?
I got a really good copy, and I keep most of my books in temperature control.
Okay.
So
that's good.
So it's staying fairly together, although, the edges of the cover are fraying off and things like that.
Well loved, yeah.
Yeah, it is well loved, and I was thankful to get that copy for, not spending $150 or whatever it's going for these days.
Right. So, and then that'll keep you busy because you could track using your ephemeris. You could be tracking, okay, what are the symbols of this moment based on which planet, etc.
Yeah. That can give me like all kinds of things to work with. The Sabian symbols are a rich source that way.
Very cool.
Astrology in the 21st century is more exciting than it's been in centuries, with revival of ancient, classical, Renaissance, medieval, and 20th century techniques, all bringing 21st century astrology into the most powerful system ever seen. But where do you begin to learn how to practice such a powerful system? I'm Rod Suskin, a professional astrologer with over 30 years' experience. Come learn with me at the Rod Suskin School of Astrology, an all-online 3-year diploma, intense, exciting, and stimulating. Learn how to marry the best of the ancient techniques with the most powerful modern techniques to give clients an accurate, insightful reading. Visit rodsuskin.com for more information.
So if you were to put on a professor hat and get somebody into astrology, where would you point them? Which texts would you put in their lap to become an astrologer?
I would say that the first thing that I would recommend is to get some kind of a journal. We've got lots of great almanacs and whatnot these days. Chani's got her own. The Honeycomb Collective out of Portland has an amazing customizable thing that you can use, track your zodiacal releasing along with a number of other techniques from the Hellenistic period. It's just great because the main thing is like we talk about these things as delineations, but the way it really hits home is when you notice, what is happening and how they specifically correlate more than just the general. This is kind of the ballpark in which they should show up. So when you start to see how it actually works in your life, you get a richer sense of, say, what is Mercury really in your chart? Like when you're really digging in and start to look at like what's happening when, say, Mercury's the Time Lord, or when Mercury goes retrograde. What are you noticing when you're seeing these alignments? What's happening? Maybe Mercury has a stronger meaning in terms of like communication for some people. Some people, it might have more to do with commerce and exchanges of different kinds. So it's good to see how it plays out on the ground. When I'm working with clients, that's always a ground rule. I know some people want you to tell them what's what in their chart, but I always want the client to tell me what happened at this time. Like what was your experience like? And let them talk a bit more so that we can be a little more to the point with how does Mercury show up for you? How does Venus show up for you? Those kind of things.
So you're like working a little forensically and allowing the client to also appreciate their lived experience and report to you, okay, well, given the spectrum of this symbol, Mercury really is coming through for me in this way. And then you take it from there.
Yeah, and that kind of correlates then with one of the other books that I would recommend for people.
Yeah.
And that is more recent. Bruce Schofield's Nature of Astrology. I found this to be, giving a really good framework for like, how is what we do in art? How is what we do a science? And, trying to be a little more disciplined about how we do these things. And for the most part, it needs to come back to like lived experience.
Is that the conclusion that Bruce comes to in his hot off the press book?
I would say that that's a part of it. Like it's that natural science approach to what is the, empirical evidence of what's there. How do we test it? I mean, he goes into a lot of detail about the limitations of empirical science and natural science at the same time as, doing the whole, we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater from the other angle. Whereas, Johannes Kepler might have said that for not throwing out the astrology with the astronomy.
Right. Yeah. So I have yet to actually dive into this book Bruce just came out with. It's so new. I'm wondering, what were some of the takeaways that he came to in terms of the how that you mentioned that have been fruitful for you in thinking about how astrology works?
Well, I think the main takeaways for me was he was pointing to a lot of science research from like Lynn Margulis and other researchers that get us to thinking about, what is the mechanism for astrology? The book doesn't settle for it just being a divination practice, though it definitely has that element to it, and that there probably is some kind of mechanism with regard to divination. But Bruce is very adamant throughout the book about, needing to take it seriously, the idea of a mechanism. It doesn't mean we have to have it all worked out. We're probably never going to be able to do that just because of the scope of what we're talking about, but that it's important to have an idea of like what is kind of really going on when we're looking at these alignments and these delineations, and figuring those things out only really helps to enhance the practice, particularly like working with clients and helping them understand, what's going on instead of just kind of introducing them into the jargon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you've already done that through poetry with the poem you read for us today being based upon taking an examination of these past historical cycles and seeing the similarities of those qualities of time and as topics arise when just two factors come together in a historical moment. But this is also operating for clients because they have factors that recur. And then you can kind of help them get oriented on their own personal map.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the main goal that I have when I'm working with clients is like, this should be helping them, not just entertaining them. It should be, helping them.
Yeah. The entertainment you do elsewhere with the poetry.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, and, there are places for that.
Yeah.
There are venues for talking about predictions and whatnot. But for the most part, when you're working with clients, it's like, let's keep it as jargon light as possible and keep it as grounded in the lived experience so that they have something they can take away from it and maybe improve how their life experience goes.
Yeah. So it's nice to see a new philosophical / higher level engagement with what is this that we're so in love with that we dedicate hours of study to and, work with artistically and also with helping professions and all of it. Like, I love that Bruce is thinking along those lines and sharing from his decades-long career. Earlier he was the Uranian columnist for the Mountain Astrologer, and he's also published about Mayan astrology. So he's really run the gamut around the various world astrologies that have existed. And he was a board member of Kepler College, for example. So I'm excited to see what he has to say. And I'm glad to know that he's already captured your heart and that you would recommend this for beginners. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, recommend. And mostly also because he points you to all kinds of places to go after that. So there's lots of detailed citations, and the bibliography in the back is extremely helpful.
Oh, very cool.
I think for people to branch out beyond just the astrology books and into like what's some stuff on quantum physics that might help you to have a better understanding of what we're talking about in terms of a quantum element to astrology. It's not just self-referential and within the field.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Any other things you would put in a new reader's hands?
I mean, Tarnas's Cosmos and Psyche, especially for the introduction, because the introductory chapters, really do lay down a philosophical framework for astrology and not in jargon as well, which is helpful when we talk about what is Stoic philosophy? How does it relate to, the worldview of what we're doing? So I think it's really helpful.
Yeah, I'm hearing you repeat the jargon freeness and this register shift of, amongst colleagues. Yeah, we can talk about the very nuts and bolts technical terms that get us further. And with others, more public facing, we have to be able to speak a little less interior to our own community and practice and try to be a little more evocative of the root of what we're actually skirting around with these technical terms, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we want astrology to keep on this trajectory that we've been seeing the last few years with more and more people showing a lot more interest in it, I think that it will help people to feel more included overall. I mean, it is great to be able to geek out a little bit and find people that speak the language, so to speak. But ultimately, we should be making that language more and more inclusive.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, any other books you want to evoke today before we sign off?
If people are interested in like traditional astrology, I think a great place to start is Demetra George's most recent tome,
Yeah.
volumes of it. But it is a good kind of platform for knowing what it is that you're doing when you're working with ancient techniques and stuff. Because going back to the ancient texts, which I would always recommend, I hope that we're all engaging at least at some level with some of these texts. It doesn't mean that everyone has to practice that, but knowing where what we do comes from and having a connection to that past that in some ways was erased throughout kind of Western culture anyway. It's good to keep in touch with those roots, going further and further back, but not taking it all like literally as was kind of beat into me growing up in like a fundamentalist Christian background. You always take the Bible literally. And then as I grew up, I'm like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really helpful to take everything literally.
Right.
But having some exposure to it and an understanding like what these ideas came out of is, I think, helpful for all of us. So
Interestingly, the entry point for you with Ellias Lonsdale's Inside Degrees and even what happened through the Astrological Mandala with Dane Rudhyar, that calls forth a practice of star work that preceded Hellenistic astrology, because it goes back to those days of omen-divination in early Babylon, where they were simply spending 735 or some odd years paying attention.
Yeah.
And like you were speaking to lived experience, it's like, we can all pay attention to what's happening with an eye to the stars and the degrees of the zodiac, tropical or sidereal, the degrees of where planets are stationing, and just like what's happening, as you pointed out with the Honeycomb Journal, and see what's practicable now, what can be shared now. Being historically and philosophically informed is amazing, and lived experience is actually the root of it as well, from now and then. And those degree systems that you are informed by.
Yeah, it's important for what we do, going back to the Schofield, it's also important for science as well, and an understanding of the world that we're in, that the important thing is that we're always testing things against our lived experience. Not that we take what we think our lived experience is for granted or take it too straightforwardly, but that we're always kind of dialectically engaging with it, so that we kind of practice what we preach in a way, and make it richer, make it part of our lives.
Yeah, that's one thing I appreciate about your work, is that you are an astrologer and a poet. And, we look back to Dorotheus, astrologer, poet, and why not write new poetry with astrology now, in our lived world now? And you're doing this. So thank you for that, and continue to shine that light for others, because that's really cool.
Yeah, may the richness keep on giving. Very
cool. So where can people find you?
So astrologically, like I have a practice, I'm on the web at intransitastrology.com. I also run a poetry reading series in the Seattle area, Margin Shift. We've got a upcoming spiritually themed poetry night on August 3rd for Lunessa. We've got a lot of really great poets that'll be speaking, yourself included. So yeah, Margin Shift can be found online at marginshift.org. As far as my poetry, it's easily, you can Google Matt Trease poet. A number of things will pop up. I had a number of pieces picked up in journals, online journals and whatnot. I have stuff in print as well. Anthology that'll be coming out next year, the second volume of Cascadian Zen, which is a really great collection of poets from around the bioregion here along the Pacific coast of North America. So everything is easily findable that way, just via Google.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone go out and check out Matt's work. And thank you for spending time with me today, sharing your favorite astrology books and the ones that have changed your life and world. And I hope to have you back.
Okay, great.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library, or to become a member, visit our website at CAELi.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice, rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.